The mess hall at Marine Corps Base Quantico fell silent the moment Staff Sergeant Derek Vance's hand closed around the ponytail. The woman in worn civilian clothes had been reaching for the last blueberry muffin, her movements slow, almost distracted. She didn't flinch when he yanked backward, didn't cry out when her head snapped back. She simply turned, her gray eyes empty of everything except a kind of tired recognition that this was happening again. Vance grinned at his buddies, their dress blues immaculate for the afternoon ceremony. Marines eat first, sweetheart. Maybe try the salad bar. His fingers were still twisted in her dark hair, still pulling. She was maybe 5'6", thin in a way that suggested too many skipped meals rather than deliberate fitness. Her flannel shirt hung loose over faded jeans. No makeup. No jewelry except a simple watch with a cracked face. She looked like someone's aunt who'd wandered onto base by accident. Someone who definitely didn't belong in a room full of warriors preparing for a medal ceremony honoring the Corps' most recent combat deployments. What Vance couldn't see was the scar tissue beneath that flannel, the puckered burns running from her right shoulder to her ribs. He couldn't see the way her left hand trembled slightly, nerve damage from a cockpit fire over Helmand Province. He couldn't see the nights she woke up choking, convinced she was still strapped into an ejection seat, still watching her wingman's FA-18 disintegrate into orange flame and black smoke. He definitely couldn't see the small silver trident pin tucked in her front pocket, the one she'd been carrying for 6 years, the one she'd stopped wearing because it only made things harder. "Let go," she said quietly. Her voice carried no authority, no command presence, just exhaustion. Vance laughed and released her hair with a theatrical flourish. "All yours, ma'am." The word dripped with mockery. His friends were already moving toward the serving line, their conversation resuming. Something about the new M27 rifle platform, something about the upcoming deployment to Okinawa. The woman straightened slowly, adjusting her flannel. She didn't reach for the muffin anymore. She just stood there, one hand unconsciously moving to her right shoulder, pressing against the scars through the fabric. In exactly 47 minutes, Staff Sergeant Derek Vance would be standing at attention in Lejeune Hall, waiting for his combat action ribbon to be presented. In exactly 47 minutes, he would watch that same woman in civilian clothes walk onto the stage. In exactly 47 minutes, his entire understanding of the military hierarchy would shatter like cockpit glass at 20,000 feet. But for now, in this moment, he grabbed 2 muffins and headed for his table, completely unaware that he just put his hands on a woman who'd flown combat missions most Marines only read about in after-action reports. The ceremony hall filled slowly, dress uniforms creating a sea of military precision. Derek Vance sat in the 3rd row, his chest tight with anticipation. This would be his first ribbon earned in actual combat, even if that combat had been limited to convoy security in Afghanistan's relatively quiet Parwan province. Still, enemy contact was enemy contact. The major had promised this ceremony would be special, that senior leadership would be attending. Vance scanned the front rows, nodding the bird colonels and a Navy captain he didn't recognize. Behind him, Lance Corporal Torres whispered, "You see who's presenting. Heard it's someone from SOCOM." Vance shrugged, his attention drifting to the stage entrance. The same woman from the mess hall was being escorted to a seat by a Navy commander, her civilian clothes looking even more out of place among the uniforms. She'd added a blazer at least, navy blue and slightly oversized, probably borrowed. Vance elbowed Torres. "Security let anybody in now, look at that." Torres followed his gaze and snorted. "Maybe someone's wife, or like somebody from the USO. The base commander took the podium, his voice booming through the sound system. "Good afternoon, Marines. Today we honor those who have answered our nation's call in combat." Standard speech. Vance had heard variations a dozen times. His knee bounced slightly, adrenaline mixing with impatience. The commander continued through the opening remarks, then paused. "Before we begin the individual presentations, I want to acknowledge a very special guest, someone whose presence here honors us far more than any ceremony could honor her." Vance felt Torres go still beside him. The commander's tone had shifted, taking on a weight that made the room tight. 6 years ago, A Navy pilot flew her FA-18 Super Hornet into the worst sandstorm Helmand Province had seen in a decade. Her mission was close air support for a Marine reconnaissance unit that had been cut off by Taliban forces. She couldn't see 50 feet in any direction. Her instruments were compromised by the sand. Every protocol said to abort. The woman in civilian clothes stared at her hands, her shoulders rigid. Vance noticed for the first time how carefully she held herself, like someone managing chronic pain. She flew anyway, the commander said. For 47 minutes, she provided covering fire using only radio communication and mathematical dead reckoning. She dropped ordnance danger close, so close that Marines on the ground reported feeling the heat from explosions through their body armor. She exhausted her entire payload. When her wingman's aircraft took a catastrophic hit from an SA-7, she broke protocol again. She stayed on station, flying cover with an empty weapons bay, talking her wingman through ejection procedures while taking ground fire herself. Vance's mouth had gone dry. He remembered this story. Every Marine remembered this story. It had become legend in the Corps, the Navy pilot who'd saved an entire recon unit against impossible odds. But that pilot had been a man. Everyone said so. The stories always said commander, always said he. The base commander stepped away from the podium, his jaw tight with something that looked like suppressed emotion. Her aircraft took 17 hits. 17. Small arms fire punched through her fuselage, her wing, her tail assembly. She flew that dying bird for another 12 minutes, refusing to leave until a Marine Cobra gunship arrived to take over. When she finally ejected, her seat malfunctioned. The initial rocket motor fired correctly, but the separation charge never activated. She rode that seat down from 4,000 feet, still strapped in, with only the drogue chute deployed. Several Marines in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Vance felt sweat forming at his collar despite the air conditioning. He remembered more details now. The rescue team had found the pilot unconscious, still in the seat, multiple fractures and burns so severe the corpsmen hadn't expected survival. 3 months in a German hospital. Another year of rehabilitation, medical retirement. The commander's voice dropped lower, forcing everyone to lean forward. She never flew again. The injuries were too severe. But before her medical separation, she did something that most people don't know about. She volunteered to help redesign close air support protocols for naval aviation. Her work became the foundation for new training standards that have been credited with saving hundreds of lives in subsequent operations. Vance watched the woman on the stage. She was looking at the ceiling now, her throat working as she swallowed. Her right hand pressed against her shoulder again, that unconscious gesture starting to make terrible sense. After her retirement, the commander continued, she was recruited for something else. Something I'm not at liberty to discuss in detail. What I can tell you is that for the last 4 years, she's been responsible for training and tactical planning at a level that affects operations across all service branches. She holds certifications and clearances that most flag officers will never achieve. And despite everything she's given, despite the pain she lives with every single day she's here, she came because I asked her to, because she believes in what we do, because Marines matter to her. The room had become absolutely silent. Even the Air Force liaison in the back row had stopped pretending to check his phone. The commander turned toward the woman, his voice gentling. "Commander, would you please join me?" She stood slowly, moving like someone who'd done physical therapy so many times she could catalog every weak joint and damaged muscle. As she approached the podium, Vance saw the limp, barely perceptible but definitely there, saw how she kept her weight on her left leg. The commander shook her hand, then addressed the room again. "Marines, I present Commander Alexis Cade, United States Navy, retired. The pilot who saved Recon Unit 47 in Helmand Province. The architect of the CAS protocols you train with today. And currently, the senior tactical advisor for Naval Special Warfare Development Group." The words hung in the air like ordnance waiting to drop. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. DevGru. SEAL Team 6. Vance felt his stomach drop into his boots. The woman he'd grabbed in the mess hall, the woman whose hair he'd yanked like she was some random civilian, advised the most elite special operations unit in the American military. Commander Cade stood at the podium now, her hands resting lightly on its edges. Up close under the stage lights, Vance could see the burned scars extending from her collar up the right side of her neck, could see the slight asymmetry in her shoulders where bones hadn't healed quite right, could see the way her left hand trembled before she curled it into a fist. She didn't look at the audience. She looked at something beyond them, her gray eyes distant. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, forcing the microphone to work. "I didn't come here to be honored. I came because Commander Bradford asked me to speak to you about something I've learned since leaving active duty." She paused, her jaw working. "It's easy to judge combat value by appearances, by rank, by the uniform someone wears or doesn't wear. It's easy to assume you know someone's worth based on whether they meet your expectations of what a warrior should look like." Vance felt Tor's glance sideways at him. His face burned. "When I was flying, I was 5'6" and barely made weight requirements. I had senior pilots tell me I looked like a child playing dress-up in a flight suit. I had maintenance crews assume I was someone's wife lost on the flight line. I had Marines I was providing air support for ask if there was a real pilot available." Her voice remained flat, emotionless, but her right hand pressed harder against that shoulder scar. "The day I saved Recon Unit 47, I heard one of those Marines on the radio. He said, and I quote, 'Tell me we didn't get the girl pilot.' He said it before I dropped ordnance, before I flew through a sandstorm that had grounded every other aircraft, before I stayed on station while my friend burned to death in the cockpit next to mine." Someone in the back row coughed. The sound echoed like gunfire. Commander Cade's eyes finally focused on the audience, scanning faces with the same methodical precision she'd probably used to scan target grids. "After the ejection, after the hospitals, after I learned to walk again, that same Marine wrote me a letter. He apologized. He said he judged me by every metric except the one that mattered, whether I could do the job. He said he would have died if I'd been the pilot he expected me to be, some mythical warrior who looked the part. He said he lived because I was exactly who I was." She released the podium, her hands falling to her sides despite the tremor. "I've worked with SEALs, Force Recon, Delta, Rangers. The ones who survive, the ones who complete impossible missions. They're not always the ones who look like recruiting posters. They're the ones who show up, who do the work, who make the hard call when everything's falling apart." Vance couldn't breathe properly. His dress blues felt too tight, his collar choking him. He wanted to sink through the floor to disappear into the foundation of the building. But Commander Cade wasn't done. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out something small, letting it catch the light. A silver trident, the Navy SEAL insignia, worn and scratched from years of handling. "This was given to me by a SEAL I advised on a mission I can't discuss. He gave it to me after the operation, told me I'd earned it more than some people who wore it officially. I've carried it for 6 years. I don't wear it because I didn't go through Bud S. I didn't earn it through that particular crucible. But I carry it to remind myself that worth isn't about appearances. It's about what you do when no one's watching, when no one expects anything from you, when you have every reason to quit." She placed the trident on the podium, its silver gleaming against the dark wood. "Every Marine receiving recognition today did something that mattered. You showed up. You did your job under fire. That's worth celebrating. But I want you to remember something else. Remember that the person standing next to you, the person who doesn't look like your idea of a warrior, might be the one who saves your life, might be the one who does the impossible when you need it most." The base commander moved back to the podium, taking it as Commander Cade stepped aside. She returned to her seat, that careful, painful walk impossible to miss now that everyone knew what they were seeing. Vance watched her sit, watched her right hand move to her shoulder again, watched her stare at nothing while the commander resumed the ceremony. Tors leaned close. "Dude, the mess hall you grabbed, I know," Vance whispered. His voice cracked. "Jesus Christ, I know." The ceremony continued. Names were called. Marines marched forward to receive their combat action ribbons, their faces proud and serious. When Vance's name echoed through the hall, he stood automatically, his body moving through muscle memory while his mind remained locked on the woman in the front row. He accepted his ribbon case from the colonel, shook hands, saluted. The applause sounded distant, underwater. As he returned to his seat, he caught Commander Cade's profile. She wasn't watching the ceremony anymore. She was looking at her hands again, turning them palm up, palm down, like she was searching for something she'd lost. The tremor in her left hand had gotten worse. Vance sat down, the ribbon case heavy in his lap. This small plastic container, this symbol of his combat experience, suddenly felt like a child's toy compared to what the woman in civilian clothes had endured. He'd been in one firefight. 30 seconds of incoming rounds while his convoy sped up to get clear. He'd fired his rifle at shadows, hit nothing, arrived at the fob with his heart pounding and his hands shaking. He'd called it combat, had built it up in his mind as something significant. Commander Cade had flown through a sandstorm into enemy fire with 17 hits to her aircraft, watched her wingman die, and then rode a malfunctioning ejection seat down from 4,000 feet. The ceremony concluded with the base commander's closing remarks, standard language about honor and sacrifice and the Marine Corps values. Everyone stood for the national anthem, hands over hearts, eyes forward. Commander Cade stood with them, her posture perfect despite the visible pain. As the last note faded and the room began to empty, Vance remained in his seat. He watched Marines file out, watched them clap each other on the back, heard them making plans to celebrate at the staff NCO club. Torres paused. "You coming?" "In a minute." Torres followed his gaze to where Commander Cade was shaking hands with the base commander, her face professionally neutral. "You gonna apologize, would you?" Vance asked. "If you grabbed someone like that," Torres was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, man, might make it worse, might just remind her that she still gets treated like that." "She should know," Vance said. "She should know I'm sorry. Your call. But maybe think about whether you're apologizing for her or for yourself." Torres left. The hall emptied further. Commander Cade was moving toward a side exit, escorted by the Navy captain. Vance stood, his legs unsteady. He made it halfway to the exit before his courage failed. What would he even say? "Sorry I grabbed you like you were nothing. Sorry I assumed you were nobody important. Sorry I'm exactly the kind of Marine you were talking about." He stopped at the water fountain, pretending to drink while the commander passed within 10 feet. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence, just kept walking with that careful gait, one hand pressed to her shoulder, the other clenched at her side against the tremor. The Navy captain with her was speaking quietly. "The car's waiting. We can get you back to the hotel, let you rest before the flight tomorrow." "I'm fine," Commander Cade said. Her voice carried the particular flatness of someone who said those words automatically, regardless of truth. "Ma'am, with respect, you haven't slept more than 4 hours in the last 3 days. The briefing documents can wait." "The briefing documents are time-sensitive. The team deploys in 6 days." "The team will deploy successfully because you've already done the work. You always do." They disappeared through the exit. Vance straightened, water dripping from his chin where he'd forgotten to swallow. He walked back through the empty ceremony hall, his new ribbon still in its case, his dress blues suddenly feeling like a costume. He found the trident on the podium where Commander Cade had left it. The building staff hadn't cleared the stage yet. The small silver pin sat there catching the overhead lights, its eagle and anchor and pistol etched in precise detail. Vance reached for it, then stopped. This wasn't his to touch, wasn't his to even look at closely. He'd lost that right in a mess hall when he'd decided someone's worth based on flannel and faded jeans. A voice spoke behind him. "She does that sometimes." Vance turned. The Navy captain stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. He was maybe 40, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent serious time outdoors in bad conditions. "Does what, sir?" "Leaves the trident somewhere. Usually at ceremonies, sometimes at training facilities. Says it helps her remember why the work matters." The captain moved closer, his eyes on the pin. "I'm Captain Ross. I work with Commander Cade at Dev Gru, and I saw what happened in the mess hall. My office overlooks it." Vance's face went hot again. "Sir," Captain Ross held up a hand. "I'm not here to discipline you. That's your command's job if they choose to pursue it. I'm here because Commander Cade asked me to retrieve something she left behind, and I figured this was it. He picked up the trident, handling it with the care usually reserved for explosives. She's done this 18 times that I know of. Leaves this pin at different bases, different units. Someone always returns it to her eventually. Sometimes that same day, sometimes weeks later. Why? Vance asked. The word came out hoarse. Ross studied him. You want my guess? I think she's testing something. Testing whether people understand what it represents. Testing whether they see the work behind the symbol or just the symbol itself. He pocketed the trident. She told me something once after a mission went sideways in Yemen. We'd lost 2 guys, good guys, and she was the one who'd planned the tactical approach. She blamed herself even though the intelligence failure wasn't on her. She said the weight of other people's lives was the heaviest thing anyone could carry, heavier than any ruck, any gear. Said it was a weight that never decreased, just got more familiar. Vance thought about the mess hall again. Thought about how easily he dismissed someone carrying that weight. I want to apologize to her, sir. Ross shook his head. She doesn't want your apology, trust me on that. What she wants is for you to be better. To think before you judge. To remember that everyone you meet is carrying something you can't see. How do I do that? You start by asking yourself why you assumed she was nobody. What was it about her appearance that made you think you could treat her that way? And be honest, because comfort lies won't help you here. Vance opened his mouth, then closed it. The honest answer was ugly. She'd looked weak, looked civilian, looked like someone who didn't belong in his world of warriors and combat veterans. Looked like someone he could dismiss. Ross must have seen something in his face. There it is. That's the thing you need to sit with. Commander Cade looks exactly like what she is, someone who's been through hell and survived. The burns, the limp, the tremor, those are all evidence of sacrifice. But they're also evidence that she's still here, still working, still serving in ways most people can't imagine. You saw weakness. You should have seen strength. Yes, sir. The words felt inadequate. Ross turned toward the door. You want to honor Commander Cade. Don't grab people's hair, don't assume. And when you're in a position to lead Marines someday, remember that the most dangerous operators sometimes look like nobody special. That's usually intentional. He paused at the threshold. One more thing. She's flying out tomorrow morning, 600 from Andrews. She's heading back to Virginia Beach to finalize plans for an operation I can't discuss. If that operation succeeds, you'll never hear about it. If it fails, good people die. And she'll carry that weight for the rest of her life. Just like she carries Helmand. Just like she carries every mission she's planned. Ross left. Vance stood alone on the stage, staring at the empty podium. The ceremony hall felt bigger now, cavernous. His reflection stared back at him from the polished floor, a Marine in dress blues with a new combat ribbon, looking exactly like what he'd thought a warrior should look like, looking like nothing at all. The staff NCO club was loud with celebration when Vance finally arrived. His unit had claimed a corner booth, beers already flowing despite the early hour. Technically, they were still on duty until 1700, but ceremony days operated under relaxed standards. Torres waved him over. There he is, Combat Action Ribbon recipient Staff Sergeant Vance. The table cheered. Someone thrust a beer into his hand. Vance sat down, the noise washing over him without penetrating. Across from him, Gunnery Sergeant Martinez was holding court about his third deployment, stories that had been polished through repetition until they gleamed. And I told the lieutenant, sir, that's not cover, that's concealment. Big difference when the rounds start flying. Yo, Vance, Torres elbowed him. You good? You've been weird since the ceremony. I'm fine. Still thinking about the Navy commander. Vance took a long drink instead of answering. The beer tasted like aluminum and regret. Martinez's attention shifted. That was wild, right? I mean, I remember when that story first hit the news. They said it was classified at first, wouldn't release pilot details. Then after she retired, it became this legend. I heard she can't even raise her right arm above shoulder height anymore. 17 hits, someone else said. How do you even keep flying with that kind of damage? Training, Martinez said. And balls. Which, proves the point that gender doesn't matter if you can do the job. Torres snorted. Easy to say now. You see how some guys reacted when women first got approved for combat roles. Everyone was talking about standards dropping, about integration ruining unit cohesion. Standards didn't drop, Martinez said firmly. Women who couldn't hack it washed out, same as men who can't hack it. The ones who made it through are solid. Vance set his beer down carefully. She's not just Navy anymore, she's working with Dev Gru. The table went quiet. Martinez leaned forward. How do you know that? Captain Ross told me. After the ceremony, he's Dev Gru too. Holy shit, Torres breathed. She's planning actual SEAL missions. Advising, planning something. Vance met Martinez's eyes, and I grabbed her hair in the mess hall this morning because I thought she was some random civilian cutting in line. The silence became absolute. Martinez's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, confusion, understanding, and finally something that looked like pity. You did what? I grabbed her, yanked her back by her ponytail, told her Marines eat first. Torres covered his face with his hands. Oh my God. She didn't say anything, Vance continued. His voice sounded distant to his own ears, like he was reporting on someone else's actions. Just told me to let go. I thought. He stopped. What had he thought? That she was nothing, that she was nobody, that she deserved to be moved aside because she didn't look like she belonged. I thought she was just some random person who wandered onto base, maybe somebody's girlfriend or wife. I didn't think she was. A combat veteran who's done more than any of us, Martinez finished. Yeah, I'm getting that. The celebration had died. Other Marines at nearby tables had picked up on the shift in mood, conversations dying to curious silence. Vance felt their attention like heat. Martinez drained his beer and set it down with deliberate care. You need to understand something, and I'm going to be straight with you because I actually give a damn about your career. What you did constitutes assault. Doesn't matter that you didn't know who she was. Doesn't matter that she didn't report it. You put your hands on someone in a threatening manner. Vance felt his throat tight. I know. Do you? Because here's what happens next. Either Commander Cade or Captain Ross files a report and you're looking at Article 128 of the UCMJ, assault, or they don't report it and you get to live with what you did. Either way, you need to figure out why you thought that was acceptable behavior. Torres spoke quietly. Gunny, he knows he messed up. Look at him. He's been destroyed since the ceremony. Good, Martinez said. He should be. Because this isn't just about one incident with one person. This is about a pattern of thinking that gets people killed in combat. You think everyone who looks weak is useless. You think everyone who doesn't fit your image of a warrior should be dismissed. That kind of thinking is how you ignore the interpreter who's trying to warn you about an IED. That's how you miss the local woman signaling that there's a sniper in the building. That's how you die. He stood, his presence commanding attention from the entire corner of the club. I've served with women who could outshoot most men in this room. I've seen female Marines carry wounded brothers out of kill zones. I've watched a female corpsman work on a sucking chest wound while taking fire, keeping some lance corporal alive long enough to get him to surgery. And every single one of them has had to deal with some variant of what Vance did today: being dismissed, being grabbed, being treated like they don't belong. Martinez picked up his cover from the table. You want to know what makes someone dangerous in combat? It's not size. It's not gender. It's not whether they look like they walked off a recruiting poster. It's whether they can think under pressure, whether they can make the hard call, whether they'll stay in the fight when everything's gone to hell. Commander Cade proved all of that in Helmand Province. She proved it again by working with Dev Gru after her body was destroyed, and Vance treated her like garbage because she was wearing flannel. He headed for the exit. The entire club watched him go. Torres exhaled slowly. Well, that was deserved, Vance said. That was deserved. The other Marines at the table started making excuses to leave. Within 5 minutes, Vance sat alone in the booth, his beer warming in his hand, his combat action ribbon suddenly feeling like evidence of his own insignificance. He thought about Commander Cade's speech, thought about her standing at the podium with burn scars visible on her neck, with her hand trembling, telling them that worth wasn't about appearances. He'd been in that room hearing those words, and he still hadn't understood, still hadn't connected the dots, still hadn't realized he was exactly the kind of person she was talking about. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Captain Ross. Commander Cade is not filing a report about this morning's incident. She asked me to tell you that she's been in your position before, young certain, wrong about important things. She said everyone deserves a chance to learn and do better. Don't waste it. Vance stared at the message until his vision blurred. The words didn't make him feel better. They made him feel worse, because they proved what he'd already known, that Commander Cade was more professional, more mature, and more capable of grace than he deserved. He typed a response. Please tell her I'm sorry. Please tell her I'll be better. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, she knows, now prove it. The barracks were quiet when Vance returned that evening. Most of his unit was still at the club or had gone into D.C. for dinner. He sat on his rack, still in his dress blues minus the jacket, and pulled up Google on his phone. Alexis Cade, Navy pilot, Helmand Province, produced thousands of results. He started reading. The first articles were from 6 years ago, when the story initially broke. Vance had been right out of boot camp then, too focused on Marine combat training to pay attention to Navy news. But the story had been everywhere. The headlines screamed, Navy pilot flies blind through sandstorm to save Marines. Female FA-18 pilot defies orders, saves reconnaissance unit. Commander Alexis Cade, the pilot who wouldn't leave. The details were worse than the base commander's summary. Commander Cade had been flying her 3rd combat mission of the day when the call came in. Recon Unit 47 had walked into an L-shaped ambush in the Sangin district, a Taliban stronghold where violence was measured in casualties per hour rather than per day. The unit's position was being overrun. They needed close air support immediately. But the sandstorm had arrived without warning, visibility dropping to near zero. Every other aircraft in the area had already diverted to alternate airfields. Tower control at Camp Bastion had ordered all remaining planes to abort and return to base. Commander Cade had been 60 miles out, her fuel at 60%, her weapons load full. She'd acknowledged the abort order. Then she'd changed her heading towards Sangin. Vance found an interview with one of the Marines she'd saved, Sergeant First Class Miguel Torres, no relation to his Tours. The interview was from 2 years ago, published in Marine Corps Times. We could hear her on the radio, Torres said. Her call sign was Widow 17. She told us she was inbound, but she couldn't see anything. Asked us to talk her onto target using distance and direction from our position. We were giving her grid coordinates, and she was plotting approach vectors manually while flying through a storm that was shaking her aircraft so hard she said her instruments were unreadable. The article included a photo of Torres holding his infant daughter. The caption read, SGT. Torres credits Commander Cade with allowing him to meet his daughter, born 8 months after his rescue. Vance kept reading. Commander Cade had dropped her entire payload, 8 precision-guided missiles and 2,000 rounds of 20 cannon, fire based entirely on voice communication and mathematical calculation. The Marines on the ground reported that explosions landed within 15 meters of their position, close enough that shrapnel scarred their vehicles. Close enough that the concussive force collapsed part of their defensive perimeter, and close enough to break the ambush, giving them space to retreat. Then her wingman, Lieutenant Bradley Chen, had taken a hit. An SA-7 surface-to-air missile, old Soviet technology that the Taliban had stockpiled for decades. The missile struck Chen's starboard engine, and his bird had disintegrated in seconds. Commander Cade had seen it happen, had watched her wingman's aircraft become a fireball, had heard him screaming on the radio as he tried to eject from a cockpit that was already cooking off ammunition. She'd stayed. With no weapons remaining, with her own aircraft taking ground fire, with fuel running critically low, she'd circled Chen's crash site and talked him through emergency procedures that he couldn't remember through the pain and panic. She'd stayed until a Marine Cobra gunship arrived to take over, and only then had she turned toward base. The damage assessment came later. 17 hits to Commander Cade's FA-18. Small arms fire had punched through her fuselage in 6 places, shredded her starboard aileron and cracked her canopy. Larger caliber rounds, probably from a DSHK heavy machine gun, had torn through her port wing and severed hydraulic lines. She'd been flying on backup systems, her aircraft hemorrhaging fluid, her control surfaces responding with dangerous delays. And she'd flown it for 12 more minutes before ejecting. Vance found a technical analysis published by the Naval Aviation Safety Center. The report was dry, clinical, focused on equipment performance and pilot decision-making. But between the lines, he could read the miracle. Commander Cade had ejected at 4,000 feet, well within safety parameters. The seat's rocket motor had fired correctly, separating her from the dying aircraft. But the subsequent separation charge, the explosive that was supposed to release her from the seat so she could parachute down independently, had malfunctioned. She'd ridden the ejection seat all the way down, strapped to 300 pounds of metal and equipment, with only the small drogue chute deployed. Drogue chutes were designed to stabilize the seat during the initial ejection phase, not to land safely. They provided some drag, enough to slow descent from terminal velocity, but not enough to prevent injury. Commander Cade had hit the ground at approximately 40 miles per hour, still strapped to the seat, absorbing the full impact through her body. The rescue team found her unconscious, her right shoulder dislocated, her collarbone fractured in 2 places, 4 ribs broken, her right femur cracked, and burns. The cockpit fire that had killed her wingman had also damaged her aircraft. Hydraulic fluid, superheated by the fire and spraying from severed lines, had soaked through her flight suit on the right side. The fluid hadn't ignited, but it had been hot enough to cause second-degree burns across her shoulder, ribs, and upper arm. Vance set his phone down. His hands were shaking. He thought about grabbing that ponytail in the mess hall, thought about his fingers tangling in her dark hair, yanking her head back. She'd been standing there, probably already in pain from the flight to Quantico, from sitting through meetings, from existing in a body that had been broken and imperfectly healed. And he'd hurt her more. Had added his violence to everything she'd already survived. His phone buzzed. "Tors, you still coming to the thing tomorrow? Martinez is running the new guys through the O-course, wants senior NCOs there to supervise." Vance had forgotten about the obstacle course training. He texted back, "Yeah, I'll be there." Another buzz, different number. "Captain Ross again. Commander Cade asked me to send you something. She said you'd understand." A link appeared. Vance clicked it. The page loaded slowly, revealing a blog post from a website called Cleared Hot, a pilot's perspective. The post was dated 3 years ago, written by someone using the handle Widow17. Vance's breath caught. That was Commander Cade's call sign. The blog post was titled "On Being Seen." He started reading. "People ask me sometimes if I'm angry about how I was treated during my career. They expect me to have stories about discrimination, about being held to different standards, about systematic bias. And I do have those stories. Every woman in the military does. But anger isn't the emotion I feel when I think about it now." The blog post continued. "What I feel is something closer to exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, although my body is tired in ways that will never fully heal. I mean the exhaustion of constantly proving yourself. Of knowing that every mistake you make reflects on your entire gender, while men's mistakes reflect only on themselves. Of walking into a ready room and watching conversations stop, watching eyes assess whether you're competent or a diversity hire. Of having your qualifications questioned by people who have half your flight hours and none of your combat experience." Vance scrolled slowly, absorbing every word. "Here's what people don't understand. I didn't fly into that sandstorm to prove anything about women in combat. I flew because Marines were dying and I had weapons and I had training. That's it. The mission mattered more than visibility, more than orders, more than my own safety. I made a tactical decision based on available information and acceptable risk. Any pilot, male or female with similar experience, would have made the same call." The post included a black and white photo. Commander Cade in her flight suit, before helmet, standing in front of an FA-18 with her helmet tucked under her arm. She looked impossibly young, maybe 26 or 27. Her smile was confident, her shoulders square. Vance compared that image to the woman he'd seen today. Same person, but transformed by pain and trauma into something harder, something that had survived by becoming less visible. The blog continued. "After the ejection, after the hospitals, people wanted to make me a symbol. They wanted me to represent women's capabilities to prove that gender integration worked. But I didn't want to be a symbol. I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly. And when the medical board said that would never happen again, I wanted to disappear. I spent a year in rehabilitation, both physical and psychological. I learned to walk without limping. I learned to use my right arm again, though it never regained full range of motion. I learned to manage chronic pain without medication that would affect my judgment. And I learned something else, something harder. I learned that I was still valuable even though I couldn't do the job I'd trained for. Vance's eyes burned. He blinked hard, refusing to cry over a blog post. People see my scars now when I bother to wear clothes that reveal them. They see the limp I try to hide. They see my hand tremble when I'm tired or stressed, and they make assumptions. They assume I'm fragile. They assume I need protection or accommodation. They assume I'm less than I was. But here's the truth. I'm exactly who I've always been. I'm still the pilot who flew through a sandstorm. I'm still the officer who made hard calls under pressure. I'm still capable of doing difficult, dangerous work. My body changed, but my mind didn't. My judgment didn't. My commitment to the mission didn't. And yet, I'm invisible now in ways I never was before. When I walk into a room in civilian clothes, people see a woman with a limp and assume I'm someone's wife, someone's assistant, someone who couldn't possibly understand military operations. They don't see the clearances I hold. They don't see the missions I plan. They don't see the hours I spend analyzing intelligence and designing tactical approaches that keep operators alive. The blog post shifted tone. Last week, I was at a conference on special operations tactics. I was there as an advisor, one of 3 people in the room cleared to discuss the specific mission parameters we were analyzing. During a break, a lieutenant colonel asked me to get him coffee. He thought I was an administrative assistant. When I politely declined and explained my role, he literally laughed, said there was no way someone who looked like me was advising on special operations. I showed him my badge, my clearances, my credentials, and you know what he said? He said it must be nice to get promoted based on diversity initiatives rather than merit. Vance felt his stomach turn. The blog continued. I didn't argue with him. I've learned that arguing doesn't change minds. I simply went back to the conference, and when my turn came to present the tactical analysis I'd prepared, I did my job. I laid out the mission parameters, identified 3 critical vulnerabilities in the proposed approach, and suggested modifications that reduced risk to the assault team by approximately 40%. My recommendations were adopted unanimously. The lieutenant colonel didn't speak to me again. This is what I want people to understand. Being underestimated isn't always a disadvantage. In fact, in my current role, it's often useful. When people think you're nobody important, they're less guarded. They speak freely. They reveal information they'd otherwise conceal. And you can observe, analyze, and understand situations more clearly than you could if everyone was performing for your benefit. So no, I'm not angry about being underestimated. I'm tired of it, certainly. But anger is a luxury I can't afford. Anger clouds judgment, and my judgment needs to remain clear because lives depend on it. The operators I advise, the missions I help plan, they're real. They're happening in real time, in dangerous places, with real consequences for failure. The post concluded. If you're reading this and you work in the military, I want you to ask yourself something. How many people have you underestimated based on their appearance? How many times have you assumed someone couldn't do the job because they didn't look like your mental image of what a warrior should be? And here's the harder question. How many times were you wrong? The people who survive in this profession, who excel at it, they're not always the ones who look the part. Sometimes they're the quiet ones, the ones with scars, the ones who don't need to broadcast their competence because they've already proven it to themselves. Look again. Look harder. You might be surprised by what you've been missing. Vance set his phone down again. His room was dark now, the sun having set while he read. He sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about assumptions and judgment and the weight of other people's lives. Finally, he picked up his phone and read the blog post again. And then once more. By the 3rd reading, he'd memorized sections. Whole paragraphs were burned into his memory, particularly the part about anger being a luxury Commander Cade couldn't afford. He thought about his own anger, the quick flash of irritation when someone cut in front of him, when things didn't go his way. He'd always thought anger was appropriate, even masculine, a warrior's emotion, but Commander Cade had transcended that, had moved beyond anger into something more dangerous and more useful: cold, clear assessment of reality. The next morning arrived with rain hammering the barracks roof. Vance was awake before his alarm, having slept poorly, his dreams full of sandstorms and falling ejection seats. He dressed in his PT gear and headed for the obstacle course through the downpour. By 700, most of his unit had assembled. Martinez stood under a shelter, his poncho dripping, watching junior Marines attempt the rope climb in the rain. The rope was slick, hands sliding, several Marines falling back into the mud. Vance. Martinez waved him over. Glad you came. We need bodies on the course to demonstrate proper technique. Show these boots how it's done. Vance nodded and headed for the starting line. The obstacle course was a standard Marine setup: walls, trenches, barbed wire crawls, rope climbs, balance beams. He'd run it hundreds of times, could complete it in his sleep. But today in the rain it felt different, harder, more significant. He ran, climbed, crawled through mud under wire. His hands slipped on wet rope, his boots struggled for purchase on slick logs. When he reached the final wall, a 12-foot vertical climb, his arms were shaking. He hauled himself over the top and dropped down the other side, landing hard enough to feel it in his knees. His time was decent. Not his best, but respectable given the conditions. Martinez walked over as Vance caught his breath. Solid run. Now do it again, but this time I want you thinking about something. Every obstacle you just completed, you did it with a body that works right. Your hands grip properly. Your legs support your weight. Your shoulders can take your full body weight on the rope. Vance straightened. Gunny, do it again, Martinez said. But this time don't use your right arm above shoulder height. Simulate Commander Cade's limitations. The rain fell harder. Other Marines had stopped to watch, sensing something significant in Martinez's tone. Vance walked back to the starting line. The whistle blew. He ran forward, hitting the first wall at full speed. Normally, he'd grab the top with both hands and pull himself up. Now, with his right arm restricted, he had to plant his left hand and use his legs to scramble up, his right arm useless for pulling. The rope climb was worse. He couldn't get proper leverage, couldn't distribute his weight correctly. His left arm screamed as it took the full load. He made it halfway up before his grip failed and he dropped back to the ground. Around him, junior Marines were whispering. He tried again, made it 3/4 of the way this time before falling. His hands were torn, blood mixing with rain. Martinez appeared beside him. Commander Cade flew an FA-18 with injuries worse than what you're simulating. She calculated approach vectors and deployed ordnance while her body was failing. She stayed in the fight when she had every reason to quit. I can't do it, Vance gasped. His left arm was cramping, his grip destroyed. Then don't do it, Martinez said. Instead, think about how she did. Think about what it takes to overcome that kind of limitation. Think about the mental discipline required to ignore pain and fear and physical failure and still complete the mission. The rain continued. Vance stood at the base of the rope looking up at the impossible climb. Around him, Marines watched silently. Finally, Torres spoke. You don't have to prove anything, man, we get it. No, Vance said. I don't get it, that's the problem. I don't understand what it took for her to do what she did. He grabbed the rope again. His hand slipped immediately, the blood making his grip even worse. He fell, landed hard, got up, tried again, fell again, got up. Martinez's voice cut through the rain. Enough, you're going to seriously injure yourself and that's not the point. Then what is the point? Vance shouted. His frustration boiled over, anger and shame mixing with the rain running down his face. What am I supposed to learn from this? That I'm weak, that I can't do what she did. I already know that. Martinez grabbed his shoulder, not roughly but firmly. The point is that you can't do it alone. None of us can. That's what people miss when they talk about heroism and individual achievement. Commander Cade didn't fly that mission alone. She had training, support, intelligence, logistics, maintenance crews, tower control, every part of a massive organization backing her up. And when she couldn't fly anymore, she found a new way to contribute. She adapted. She found a role where her skills still mattered. He released Vance's shoulder. You grabbed her hair and dismissed her because you thought she was weak. But weakness isn't about physical limitation. Weakness is giving up when things get hard. Weakness is refusing to adapt. Weakness is treating people like garbage because they don't meet your expectations. Commander Cade isn't weak. She's possibly the strongest person any of us will ever meet. And you need to understand that strength comes in forms you don't expect. The Marines around them had gone completely silent. Even the rain seemed quieter. Vance stood there, chest heaving, hands bleeding, his PT gear soaked and muddy. He thought about Commander Cade walking across that stage with her limp. Thought about her standing at the podium with trembling hands. Thought about her choosing to come to Quantico to subject herself to a ceremony and attention when she could have stayed in Virginia Beach and avoided it all. She didn't have to come yesterday, he said quietly. She could have said no, could have sent someone else to speak, but she came. Yeah, Martinez agreed. She did. You know why? Vance shook his head. Because she believes in us. Believes in Marines, in the Corps, in the mission. Believes it enough to keep showing up even when showing up means dealing with people like you. People who judge her, who underestimate her, who hurt her without even realizing they're doing it. Martinez turned to address the assembled Marines. Everyone here needs to hear this. We talk about honor and courage like they're things that only exist in combat. But they exist here too, in how we treat each other and how we treat people who aren't like us. Commander Cade has more honor in her broken body than most of us will achieve in our entire careers, and the least we can do is treat her and people like her with the respect they've earned. He walked away, leaving Vance standing in the rain. Slowly, the other Marines dispersed, heading back to continue training. Torres stayed. He handed Vance a towel that was only marginally less wet than Vance himself. You good? No, Vance said honestly, but I'm starting to understand what I need to fix. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine training. Vance moved through it automatically, his mind elsewhere. His hands stung where the rope had torn them, but he didn't bother going to medical. The pain felt appropriate somehow, like a physical manifestation of everything he'd learned. That evening, he sat in his room and pulled out his personal laptop. He opened a document and started writing. The words came slowly at first, then faster as he found his rhythm. Letter to Commander Alexis Cade, he typed, then deleted it, started again. Commander Cade, my name is Staff Sergeant Derek Vance, United States Marine Corps. Yesterday morning, I assaulted you in the mess hall at Marine Corps Base Quantico. I grabbed your hair and treated you with disrespect and casual cruelty. I did this because I assumed you were nobody important. I assumed you didn't belong. I assumed I had the right to move you aside because I was a Marine and you looked like a civilian who had wandered onto base. I was wrong about everything. He paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. I don't expect you to forgive me. Captain Ross told me you're not filing a report, and I'm grateful for that, but I also recognize that I don't deserve your grace. I deserve to face consequences for what I did. But more than that, I deserve to carry the weight of understanding what kind of person I was in that moment. After the ceremony, I researched your career. I read about Helmand Province. I read about your injuries. I read your blog post about being underestimated. And I spent this morning trying to complete an obstacle course with my right arm restricted, trying to understand even a fraction of what you overcome every day. I failed. I couldn't do it. I couldn't complete simple physical tasks that I do without thinking, all because I limited myself in ways that don't come close to matching your actual limitations. Here's what I learned. Strength isn't about what your body can do. It's about what you choose to do despite what your body can't do. It's about showing up when you could stay home. It's about serving when you've already given more than anyone should have to give. It's about planning missions that will send other people into danger while you stay behind, carrying the weight of knowing their lives depend on your judgment. Vance stopped typing, reread what he'd written. It felt inadequate, too focused on his own revelation rather than her experience. He deleted the last paragraph and started again. I want you to know that what happened in the mess hall won't happen again. Not from me, and not from any Marine I have influence over. I'm going to be better. I'm going to think before I judge. I'm going to remember that everyone I meet is carrying something I can't see. I'm going to honor your service by being worthy of it. You said in your speech that the people who survive are the ones who show up and do the work. You've been doing that work while I've been playing at being a warrior. My combat action ribbon represents 30 seconds of incoming fire during a convoy. Yours represents flying into hell repeatedly, saving lives repeatedly, and then continuing to serve after your body was destroyed. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did. I understand who you are. And I understand that I have a long way to go before I can honestly say I deserve to call myself a Marine. He signed it. Respectfully, Staff Sergeant Derek Vance. Then he stared at it for 20 minutes before deleting the entire thing. What was the point? Commander Cade had said she didn't want his apology, had said what she wanted was for him to be better. Writing a letter accomplished nothing except making him feel like he'd done something meaningful. It was performative. It was about his guilt, not about actual change. Instead, Vance opened a new document and started writing something different, a training proposal. Subject: mandatory briefing on professional conduct and unconscious bias for all Marines E5 and above. Purpose: to address patterns of behavior that undermine unit cohesion and mission effectiveness. Background: recent incidents have demonstrated that Marines of all ranks sometimes fail to recognize the contributions and capabilities of service members who don't fit traditional expectations. This includes but is not limited to women in combat roles, service members with visible disabilities or injuries, and personnel who don't conform to stereotypical warrior appearances. He outlined a training program that would include real examples, would discuss the research on unconscious bias, would create opportunities for Marines to examine their own assumptions. He included case studies, Commander Cade's story among them, with her permission if she was willing to grant it. He structured the training to focus not on guilt or shame but on tactical effectiveness, made the case that underestimating people was a strategic weakness, that diverse perspectives improved problem-solving, that the best teams were built on mutual respect rather than superficial judgments. It took him 3 hours to complete the proposal. When he finished, it was nearly midnight. He saved the document, then sent it to his personal email. Tomorrow he'd present it to Martinez, who could bring it up the chain of command. Maybe nothing would come of it. Probably nothing would come of it. But at least he'd be trying. At least he'd be doing something more useful than writing apology letters that served only to make himself feel better. Vance closed his laptop and lay back on his rack. Through the barracks window, he could see the rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, stars beginning to emerge. He thought about Commander Cade flying through the sandstorm, unable to see anything, navigating by mathematics and faith. Thought about her making the impossible possible through sheer will and training. And he thought about himself in the mess hall, grabbing her hair, so certain of his own importance and her insignificance. The contrast was devastating, but maybe that was the point. Maybe he needed to be devastated. Needed to have his understanding of himself shattered so he could build something better from the pieces. He fell asleep thinking about flight paths and ejection seats and the weight of other people's lives. His dreams were turbulent, full of sandstorms and falling through empty air, reaching for something solid and finding nothing. When he woke at 5:30 for morning PT, his hands were still torn from the rope climb. He looked at them in the dim pre-dawn light, bloody, bruised, damaged in ways that would heal within days. Nothing like Commander Cade's hands. Nothing like her permanent tremor, her chronic pain, her body's constant reminder of what she'd sacrificed. He wrapped his hands carefully, then headed out to join his unit for the morning run. The sky was lightening, clouds breaking apart to reveal blue beneath. It looked like it was going to be a good day. Vance hoped that wherever Commander Cade was, Virginia Beach, probably, working on mission plans for operations he'd never hear about, she was having a good day too. That the pain wasn't too bad. That her work was going well. That she knew, somehow, that at least one Marine was thinking about her and trying to be better because of her example. 3 weeks passed. Vance submitted his training proposal through official channels, watching it disappear into the bureaucratic machine that processed every idea and suggestion. He didn't expect to hear back quickly, if at all. The Marine Corps moved slowly on policy changes, and his proposal was ambitious. In the meantime, he focused on his daily duties. He supervised junior Marines, ran training exercises, completed paperwork. And he thought constantly about judgment and assumptions and the weight of other people's lives. He noticed things he'd never noticed before. The way female Marines braced themselves when entering rooms full of men, their body language defensive before anyone spoke. The way senior NCOs dismissed ideas from junior personnel without listening. The way everyone performed for rank, showing one face to superiors and another to subordinates. It was exhausting to see clearly. He understood now why Commander Cade looked so tired. On a Friday afternoon, Martinez called him into the office. "Got something for you," the gunny said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your training proposal got approved, modified but approved. They're piloting it at Quantico starting next month. 6 sessions mandatory for all staff NCOs and officers, your primary instructor." Vance picked up the folder with numb fingers. What? You wrote it, you present it. That's how this works. Martinez leaned back in his chair. They made some changes, toned down some of your language, added some official doctrine citations, but the core is intact. You'll be teaching Marines about unconscious bias and professional conduct. I'm not qualified, you're qualified because you lived it, because you messed up and learned from it. That makes you more qualified than someone who's only read about it in a textbook. Martinez's expression softened slightly. This is good work, Vance. Genuinely good work. If it gets implemented across the Corps, you might actually change some minds, might prevent the next Derek Vance from grabbing the next Alexis Cade. Vance opened the folder. The first page was a memo from the base commander approving the pilot program. The second page was his proposal, edited and reformatted into official doctrine language. The third page made his breath catch. It was a letter. "Staff Sergeant Vance," it began. "Captain Ross forwarded your training proposal to me for review. I'm not officially in your chain of command, but my role at DevGru sometimes includes advising on training programs across service branches. Your proposal demonstrates a level of self-awareness and tactical thinking that impressed me. More importantly, it demonstrates that you meant what Captain Ross told me, that you were committed to being better." The signature at the bottom read, "Commander Alexis Cade, USN Ret, Senior Tactical Advisor, Naval Special Warfare Development Group." Vance read the letter 3 times. His hands were shaking. "She saw this," Martinez nodded. "Apparently she was consulted during the approval process. They wanted her input on the section about service members with combat injuries. She not only provided input, she volunteered to be a guest speaker if the pilot program is successful. She would come here again. If the training works, yes. She'd come back to Quantico to speak to your classes about her experiences, about being underestimated, about adapting to limitations, about continuing to serve." Martinez stood up. "Don't screw this up, Vance. This is your chance to make something good come from something terrible. Use it." The first training session was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Vance spent that time preparing obsessively, refining his presentation, gathering additional research, developing exercises that would challenge assumptions without triggering defensive reactions. He watched videos of unconscious bias training from civilian corporations and adapted the techniques for military context. He read academic papers on stereotype threat and cognitive shortcuts. He practiced his delivery until he could present the material without notes. The night before the first session, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his rack reviewing every section of the training, searching for weaknesses or areas that might cause offense. The goal was to change minds, not to make people angry. But how did you tell someone they'd been operating on faulty assumptions without implying they were bad at their job? At 200, his phone buzzed. Another text from Captain Ross. "Commander Cade asked me to pass along some advice for your first training session. She said don't apologize for the content. Don't soften the message to make people comfortable. The truth is uncomfortable. That's the point. If everyone leaves feeling good about themselves, you've failed. They should leave feeling challenged. That's where growth happens. Vance typed back, "Thank you, please tell her I'll do my best." "She knows you will. Good luck, Staff Sergeant." The first session began at 900 in a classroom that felt too small for 30 staff NCOs and officers. They filed in with the resigned expressions of people attending mandatory training they expected to be boring and useless. Vance stood at the front, his uniform perfect, his presentation loaded on the screen behind him. The base commander made brief opening remarks, then turned the floor over to Vance. "Good morning," Vance began. "My name is Staff Sergeant Derek Vance, and 3 weeks ago I assaulted a decorated Navy combat veteran because I assumed she was nobody important." The room went silent. Everyone sat up straighter. This training is about that assault, about the assumptions that led to it, about the patterns of thinking that make us tactically weaker and morally compromised, and about how we can be better. He clicked to the next slide. It showed Commander Cade in her flight suit before Hellman standing in front of her FA-18, young, confident, smiling. This is Commander Alexis Cade. By the time this photo was taken, she had more combat flight hours than most pilots achieve in their entire careers. She was a highly qualified, extremely competent naval aviator. And when she walked into ready rooms, people assumed she was lost, assumed she was someone's wife, assumed she couldn't possibly be a pilot. He clicked again. The next image showed Commander Cade after Hellman in a hospital bed, her right side bandaged, her face pale with pain. This is Commander Cade after flying her FA-18 through a sandstorm to save a Marine reconnaissance unit, after taking 17 hits to her aircraft, after watching her wingman die, after riding a malfunctioning ejection seat down from 4,000 feet. She spent 3 months in this hospital bed, followed by a year of rehabilitation. Her career as a pilot was over. Another click. Commander Cade on the stage at Quantico, standing at the podium in her civilian clothes, burned scars visible on her neck. This is Commander Cade 3 weeks ago when she came to speak at a ceremony here at Quantico. And this, he clicked to security footage from the mess hall. Clear video showing Vance grabbing Commander Cade's ponytail, yanking her head back, then releasing her with a dismissive gesture. The room erupted. Officers were sitting forward, staring at the screen. Someone whispered, "Holy shit, is that you?" Vance let the video play through, let them watch the entire interaction. Let them see Commander Cade's tired resignation, his casual cruelty, the way he'd laughed with his friends afterward. When the video ended, he paused before speaking. "Yes, that's me. That's what I did 3 weeks ago to a woman who has given more to this country than most of us ever will. I grabbed her hair. I moved her aside. I treated her like she was nothing. And I did it because she was wearing civilian clothes and looked weak. She had a limp. She looked small. She didn't fit my mental image of what a warrior should look like, so I assumed she didn't belong, assumed she was nobody, assumed I had the right to put my hands on her." He met the eyes of the officers in the front row. "I was wrong about everything, and statistically most of you have been wrong in similar ways, maybe not as dramatically, maybe you didn't grab someone's hair. But you've made assumptions based on appearance. You've dismissed someone's capabilities because they didn't look the part. You've underestimated people who deserved better." A lieutenant colonel raised his hand. "Staff Sergeant, are you saying we should ignore physical standards, that we should pretend size and strength don't matter in combat?" "No, sir. I'm saying we should evaluate people based on their performance, not our assumptions about their performance." Commander Cade was 5'6" and barely made weight requirements. On paper, she looked like someone who couldn't handle an FA-18. In reality, she flew that aircraft better than most pilots ever could. She proved it repeatedly in combat, but people kept judging her by appearance instead of results. He clicked to the next slide, which showed performance statistics. Research demonstrates that diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams in complex problem-solving tasks. Units with female members show improved discipline and reduced risk-taking behavior. Teams that include people with physical disabilities develop more innovative tactical approaches because they can't rely on standard solutions. The lieutenant colonel wasn't satisfied. "That's academic research. What about real-world combat?" Vance smiled grimly. Helmand Province was real-world combat, sir. Commander Cade saved 13 Marines that day. They all went home to their families because she ignored the assumptions people made about her and did her job. I'd say that's pretty real-world. He spent the next hour walking them through the training material, discussed the psychology of unconscious bias, the way human brains used shortcuts to process information quickly, explained how those shortcuts evolved for survival in ancient environments but became liabilities in modern warfare, showed them data on how diverse perspectives improved intelligence analysis, tactical planning, and mission outcomes. Then he moved to exercises. Pair up with the person next to you. I'm going to show you photos of various service members. Without any additional information, I want you to write down your immediate assumptions about their rank, their role, their competence. Be honest. This is anonymous. He displayed the first photo, a lean Asian American Marine in utilities, looking young and somewhat uncertain. The room filled with the sound of pens on paper. After 30 seconds, Vance clicked to the next slide. This is Colonel Naomi Chen, commander of the 5th Marine Regiment. She's led combat operations in 3 theaters and holds a PhD in strategic studies from Georgetown. She's considered one of the most brilliant tactical minds in the Corps. Uncomfortable shifting in the audience. Several people stared at their papers, their initial assumptions clearly far from reality. The training continued through more examples, each designed to challenge preconceptions. An older man in Army uniform who looked desk-bound turned out to be a Special Forces operator with multiple combat deployments. A young woman who looked fresh out of basic was actually a decorated EOD technician with a Navy Cross. A service member using a wheelchair was a pilot who'd ejected after aircraft failure and continued flying helicopters after rehabilitation. By the time Vance reached the final hour, the room's energy had shifted. People were engaged now, leaning forward, asking genuine questions instead of defensive challenges. A female captain spoke up. "Staff Sergeant, this training is valuable, but what do we do with it? How do we change behavior that's often unconscious?" "Good question, ma'am. The research suggests 3 things. First, awareness. Simply knowing that you have these biases makes you more likely to catch yourself acting on them. Second, exposure. Actively seeking out interactions with people who don't fit your expectations. And third, accountability. Calling out bias when you see it, including your own." He paused. "I'm going to be honest with you all. This training exists because I messed up badly, because I hurt someone who deserved better, and because I was lucky enough to have leaders who made me confront what I'd done instead of letting me rationalize it away. But most people who act on unconscious bias never get that moment of clarity. They go their whole careers underestimating people, making poor tactical decisions based on faulty assumptions, and wondering why their units underperform." The base commander, who'd been sitting in the back observing, stood up. "Staff Sergeant Vance is being modest. What he's not telling you is that this training was his idea. He wrote the initial proposal. He volunteered to be the primary instructor knowing it would require him to publicly admit his failures. That takes courage, and it demonstrates the kind of honest self-assessment we need more of in the Corps." He addressed the room. "I'm making this training mandatory across the entire base. Every Marine, every sailor attached to Marine units, every duty civilian working here. Everyone will go through this program. And if it's effective, which I believe it will be, we'll push for Corps-wide implementation." Vance felt his chest tighten. Corps-wide implementation meant thousands of Marines would hear about what he'd done to Commander Cade, would see that video, would know exactly what kind of person he'd been. The commander continued. "We talk a lot about adaptability, about overcoming challenges, about being the best warriors we can be. But we don't talk enough about how our own biases limit us, how they make us weaker, how they cause us to waste the talents of people who don't fit our narrow definitions of what a warrior looks like. That changes now." After the session ended, people approached Vance with questions and comments. Most were supportive, a few skeptical, one openly hostile. A master sergeant from another unit got in his face. "You're making us all look bad, making us sit through training because you couldn't keep your hands to yourself." Vance met his eyes. If you've never made assumptions about someone based on their appearance, then this training isn't for you. But if you're honest with yourself, you'll recognize that we all do it. I was just unfortunate enough to do it to someone who'd accomplished more than most of us ever will. The master sergeant walked away muttering, but more people approached with genuine interest, wanting to discuss specific examples, asking how to implement similar training in their units. Vance answered as best he could, still learning himself. That evening, Vance received an email. The sender was listed as A. Cade. His hands shook as he opened it. Staff Sergeant Vance, Captain Ross attended your first training session as an observer. He reported that it was excellent, professional, challenging, and effective. He said several officers approached him afterward to discuss implementing similar programs in their commands. I wanted to thank you for taking this seriously, for using what happened as an opportunity to create something positive. Many people would have simply apologized and moved on, letting the incident fade into memory. You chose to do the harder thing, to examine your own biases publicly and to help others examine theirs. That takes courage. I also wanted to clarify something. When I said I didn't want your apology, I didn't mean that your actions didn't matter. I meant that words alone don't create change. Apologies are easy. They cost nothing. What costs something is the work you're doing now, the training you developed, the time you're investing in helping people understand why assumptions matter. I've spent the last 6 years working in an environment where I'm constantly underestimated, where people see my limp and my scars and assume I'm fragile, where I have to prove my competence repeatedly because my appearance doesn't match expectations. It's exhausting, but it's also taught me something valuable. The people who underestimate me are revealing their own limitations, not mine. You underestimated me in the mess hall, but you've spent the last 3 weeks confronting that failure and building something better from it. That's growth. That's what I respect. I'm scheduled to attend your training in 2 weeks as a guest speaker. Captain Ross suggested I address one of your sessions to provide a first-person perspective on being underestimated. I've agreed to do this, but I want to make something clear. I'm not interested in being treated like a victim or an inspiration. I'm neither. I'm simply someone who did my job under difficult circumstances and continues to do my job despite permanent injuries. If I speak to your class, I'll tell them the truth. That being underestimated is sometimes useful. That assumptions create tactical vulnerabilities. That the most dangerous operators are often the ones nobody notices. And that if they want to be effective leaders, they need to look past appearances and evaluate people based on capability. I hope that aligns with your training objectives. Respectfully, Alexis Cade. Vance read the email 3 times. Then he typed a response. Commander Cade, having you speak to my class would be an honor. Your perspective is exactly what this training needs: honest, tactical, focused on mission effectiveness rather than politics. I'll adjust the session to accommodate your presentation. Please let me know if there's anything you need from me to prepare. And thank you for giving me another chance. I won't waste it. Derek Vance. He hit send before he could second-guess the informality of signing with just his first name. She'd done the same. Maybe that meant something. Maybe it meant she saw him as a person rather than just the Marine who'd grabbed her hair. Or maybe it meant nothing. He'd find out in 2 weeks. The subsequent training sessions followed similar patterns. Initial skepticism from attendees, gradual engagement as the material hit home, and usually a few people approaching afterward with their own stories of being underestimated or of underestimating others. Vance refined his delivery based on feedback, added new examples, developed more sophisticated exercises. By the 5th session, he felt confident in the program's effectiveness. He could see the change in body language when people recognized their own biases, could hear it in their questions, could sense the shift from defensive resistance to genuine curiosity. On the morning Commander Cade was scheduled to speak, Vance arrived at the classroom 2 hours early. He checked the presentation equipment 3 times, arranged the seating to ensure good sight lines, and reviewed his introduction notes until he had them memorized. At 8:30, Captain Ross arrived with Commander Cade. She was dressed more formally than at the previous ceremony: dark slacks, a white button-down shirt, a navy blazer that probably concealed her shoulder scars. Her hair was pulled back in the same ponytail Vance had grabbed. She walked with that careful gait, her right hand pressed occasionally to her shoulder. Vance stood at attention. "Commander Cade, Captain Ross, thank you for coming." Commander Cade studied him for a moment. Up close he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the gray threading through her dark hair, the burned scars extending from her collar. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well. "Staff Sergeant," she acknowledged. "Captain Ross tells me the training's been well received." "Yes, ma'am. We've had strong engagement from all attendees." "Good." She moved toward the front of the classroom, examining the presentation setup. "Walk me through the session structure. Where do I fit in?" Vance explained the flow, opening discussion about assumptions, examples of underestimated service members, exercises in recognizing bias, then her presentation as a real-world case study. "I thought you could speak for 20 to 30 minutes about your experiences. Then we'd open it up for questions. Questions are fine, but establish ground rules. I won't discuss classified operations or current missions. I won't provide medical details beyond what's publicly known. And I won't debate whether women should be in combat roles. That's settled policy, and I'm not interested in relitigating it." "Understood, ma'am." Commander Cade turned to face him directly. "One more thing. Don't introduce me as a hero. Don't frame what I did in Helmand as extraordinary. Frame it as a pilot doing her job under challenging circumstances. The hero narrative is useful for recruiting posters, but it's not useful for teaching tactical thinking." Vance nodded. "How would you like to be introduced?" "Commander Alexis Cade, retired naval aviator, current advisor for Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Focus on my current work, not past operations." People need to understand that service doesn't end when your body gives out. That's the tactical lesson here. How to continue contributing when you can't do the job you originally trained for. At 900, 30 staff NCOs and officers filed into the classroom. The energy was different from previous sessions. Word had spread that Commander Cade would be speaking. People wanted to hear from the pilot who'd become a legend in Marine combat lore. Vance delivered his standard opening, showing Commander Cade's photo progression from active pilot to injured survivor to current advisor. When he reached the mess hall video, he saw several people glance toward Commander Cade, checking her reaction. She watched the screen impassively, her face revealing nothing. After the video ended, Vance said, "That incident was 3 weeks ago. The woman I assaulted has agreed to speak with you today about her experiences being underestimated and how those experiences shaped her approach to tactical planning." "Commander Cade." She stood and walked to the front with that careful gait. For a moment she said nothing, just looked out at the audience with those gray, assessing eyes. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying clearly. "I'm not here to make you feel bad. Staff Sergeant Vance does that effectively enough on his own." Scattered laughter broke the tension. Commander Cade continued, "I'm here to talk about tactical advantages, specifically the tactical advantage of being underestimated. When people think you're weak, they don't prepare for you. They don't take you seriously. They make mistakes, and those mistakes create opportunities." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a tactical diagram of a building assault. "Last year, I planned an operation involving a high-value target in an urban environment. The target had extensive security, including experienced former military personnel. The assault team needed to breach the building without triggering alarm systems or alerting nearby hostile forces. Standard approach would be dynamic entry, fast, loud, overwhelming force, but the target was expecting that. His security was positioned to counter exactly that approach." She clicked again, adding overlay showing approach vectors. "Instead, we used a support element that included 2 female operators. They approached the building posing as food delivery personnel, which the security team barely scrutinized because they didn't match the profile of threats. The delay in recognizing them as operators gave the assault team the extra seconds needed to position without alerting the target. Mission successful, 0 casualties." A female master gunnery sergeant raised her hand. "Ma'am, was that a one-time tactic? Or something reproducible?" "Reproducible. We've used variations repeatedly. Specific approach changes, but the principle remains constant: people underestimate threats that don't match their expectations. Female operators, operators with visible disabilities, operators who look young or old or otherwise non-threatening. They all provide tactical advantages precisely because they're underestimated. Commander Cade moved away from the screen, standing at the front of the classroom without notes. When I was flying, people underestimated me constantly. It was frustrating, infuriating sometimes, but it also taught me to use assumptions as a weapon. If people expected me to be cautious, I could be aggressive and catch them off guard. If they expected me to defer to male pilots, I could make the hard call and own the consequences. Their assumptions created space for me to operate. She paused, her right hand moving to her shoulder. After Helmand, after the injuries, the underestimation intensified. People saw the limp and the scars and assumed I was finished. Assumed I couldn't contribute anymore. That created even more space to work. I could walk into rooms and observe without people performing for me. Could ask questions that senior officers would be challenged on because nobody thought I mattered. Could gather intelligence that would have been concealed from someone who looked like a threat. A Navy lieutenant commander spoke up. "You're saying the injuries made you more effective?" "In some ways, yes. They ended my flying career, which was devastating. But they opened doors to different work. Work that required different skills: analysis, planning, understanding human behavior. I'm better at that work now than I was at 25. My body is worse, but my judgment is sharper." She clicked to another slide, this one showing statistics on operational success rates. Teams I've advised have a 93% mission success rate. That's significantly higher than average for comparable operations. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because my success is directly related to something most tactical planners don't consider: how assumptions affect operational security and approach vectors. The room was completely silent now. Everyone leaned forward, absorbing her words. Commander Cade continued. "When Staff Sergeant Vance grabbed my hair in the mess hall, he proved something I've known for years. People make instant judgments based on appearance. Those judgments affect behavior. He saw someone who looked weak and dismissed, and he acted accordingly. That's a tactical vulnerability, because if I had been a threat, his assumption would have given me an opening." She turned to look at Vance, her expression neutral. "He spent the last 3 weeks analyzing his failure and building training to help others avoid similar mistakes. That's good. That's what professional growth looks like. But I want to add something he might not emphasize. The problem isn't just that he underestimated me. The problem is that underestimation makes you predictable. If I know you'll dismiss me based on appearance, I can use that. I can position myself where you won't notice me. I can gather information you'll speak freely around me. I can identify weaknesses you won't bother concealing because you don't think I'm capable of exploiting them. Your assumptions become my weapons." A colonel in the front row raised his hand. "Commander, are you suggesting we should be paranoid? Assume everyone's a threat?" "No, sir. I'm suggesting you should evaluate people based on behavior rather than appearance. Watch what they do. Listen to what they say. Assess capability through observation rather than assumption. That's not paranoia, that's basic intelligence discipline." She moved back to the podium, gripping it with both hands. The tremor in her left hand was visible. "I'll tell you something personal. When I wake up in the morning, it takes me 20 minutes to move without pain. My right shoulder has limited range of motion. My left hand shakes when I'm tired or stressed. I can't run anymore. I can't pass a standard physical fitness test. By most metrics, I'm disabled, medically retired, no longer capable of military service. But I plan operations that affect national security. I advise the most elite operators in the American military. I analyze intelligence and design tactical approaches that keep people alive. And I do it better now than I did when I was flying because pain teaches patience, because limitation teaches creativity, because being underestimated teaches you to see opportunities others miss." She released the podium, her hands falling to her sides despite the tremor. "Staff Sergeant Vance asked earlier how you change behavior that's often unconscious. Here's my answer. You practice seeing differently. Every time you meet someone new, consciously list your assumptions about them. Then consciously question those assumptions. Are they based on observed behavior or on stereotypes? Are they tactically useful or tactically limiting? Are they making you smarter or just more comfortable? That practice is uncomfortable. You'll discover you make assumptions constantly about everyone. You'll realize how often you're wrong, but discomfort is where growth happens, and growth is how you become better at your job. She paused, scanning the audience. Questions. Hands shot up across the room. Commander Cade pointed at a female captain. Ma'am, how do you manage the emotional toll of being constantly underestimated? I don't entirely. It's exhausting. Sometimes I want to scream at people, force them to acknowledge my capabilities, but that emotional reaction clouds judgment. So instead, I document. I keep records of assumptions people make, of how those assumptions affect behavior, of tactical implications. I turn frustration into data that makes it useful. She pointed at a male staff sergeant. Commander, do you think the military has improved in addressing bias? Yes and no. Policy has improved. Women are now integrated into combat roles, which was essential, but policy doesn't change culture instantly. There are still people who resent integration, who actively or passively undermine female service members. But there are also people like Staff Sergeant Vance who make mistakes, learn from them, and work to be better. The ratio is shifting. Slowly. More questions followed. Commander Cade answered each one with the same direct honesty, never softening her words but never attacking either. She described specific incidents: being mistaken for administrative staff at SOCOM, having her expertise questioned by junior officers, watching male advisors receive credit for her tactical recommendations. But she framed each incident as a learning opportunity rather than a grievance. After 40 minutes, Captain Ross caught her eye and tapped his watch. Commander Cade nodded. Last question. A gunnery sergeant in the back stood. Ma'am, if you could go back to before Helmand, knowing what you know now, would you still fly that mission? Commander Cade was quiet for a long moment. Her right hand pressed against her shoulder, that unconscious gesture Vance had seen repeatedly. Yes, she finally said. The mission mattered. Marines were dying. I had weapons and training. The sandstorm, the injuries, the end of my flying career, those were consequences, not reasons to abort. I'd make the same call today. She stepped away from the podium. Thank you for your time, and thank you to Staff Sergeant Vance for creating this training. The work matters. Applause filled the room. People stood, the ovation lasting longer than standard military courtesy required. Commander Cade stood there accepting it, her face neutral but something in her eyes suggesting she was uncomfortable with the attention. When the applause finally died, the base commander dismissed the class. People lingered, several approaching Commander Cade with questions or comments. Vance watched from the side, giving her space. Captain Ross appeared beside him. That went well. She was worried about coming across as bitter. She didn't. She was perfect. Yeah, Ross studied Vance. You've done good work here, Staff Sergeant. She's right about that. This training could make a real difference if it gets implemented widely. Will it? Depends. The Corps is resistant to change, especially change that requires admitting past failures, but the base commander is pushing hard for it, and Commander Cade's involvement gives it credibility. People respect her. That matters. Vance watched Commander Cade speaking with the female master gunnery sergeant, their conversation animated. Does she do this often, speak at training events? Not really. She avoids the spotlight when possible, but she'll do it when she thinks it serves a purpose, when she thinks it might actually change something. Ross paused. She told me something after your first email. She said most people apologize to make themselves feel better, not to make things better. She said you were different, that you understood the difference between words and work. That's high praise from her. Don't waste it. I won't, sir. Ross moved toward Commander Cade, ready to escort her back to her car, but she waved him off, limping over to where Vance stood instead. Staff Sergeant, Commander. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Commander Cade said, You did well. The training is solid. Keep refining it, but don't soften it. People need to be challenged. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your experiences. She studied him with those assessing gray eyes. When I left active duty, I thought I was finished. Thought my service was over because I couldn't fly anymore. Took me a year to understand that service takes many forms. You're learning that faster than I did. Use it. "I will, ma'am." Commander Cade started to turn away, then stopped. "One more thing, that video of the mess hall incident. I know it's uncomfortable for you to show it repeatedly, but don't take it out of the training. It's powerful because it's real. Because people can see themselves in it. That's what makes it effective." "Understood, ma'am." She left with Captain Ross, that careful walk carrying her out of the classroom and back to whatever classified work waited in Virginia Beach. Vance stood alone in the empty room, looking at the tactical diagrams still displayed on the screen, thinking about assumptions and tactical advantages and the weight of other people's lives. The next morning, he received orders. The base commander wanted the training expanded immediately, offered to 4 additional units before the end of the month. Vance would be the primary instructor for all sessions, with assistance from other staff NCOs he'd train himself. It was a significant responsibility. It was also exactly what he needed. Over the following months, Vance delivered the training 18 more times. Each session brought new challenges: skeptical senior officers, resistant NCOs, people who arrived expecting political correctness lectures and left thinking differently about tactical effectiveness. He refined his approach constantly, added new examples, developed better exercises. Several female Marines approached him after sessions to share their own experiences of being underestimated, sometimes with tears, sometimes with anger, always with relief that someone was finally addressing it. Male Marines approached too, admitting their own biases, asking how to be better mentors and leaders. The training began spreading beyond Quantico. Word reached other bases, other commands. Requests came in for Vance to present at Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton, even Okinawa. The base commander approved the travel, recognizing that the training was filling a genuine need. Vance became, somewhat ironically, the Marine Corps' unofficial expert on unconscious bias and professional conduct. It wasn't a role he'd sought, wasn't something he'd trained for, but it was the role he'd earned through failure and subsequent growth. 6 months after the initial incident, Vance received notification that the training was being formally adopted Corps-wide. All Marines E5 and above would be required to complete it. A curriculum development team would standardize the content, but Vance's core material would remain intact. He'd be reassigned temporarily to work with that team, helping to train other instructors. The notification included a letter from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, commending his initiative and professional development. Vance read it 3 times, still not quite believing this had grown from him grabbing someone's hair in a mess hall. That evening, he composed an email to Commander Cade. He'd corresponded with her occasionally over the months, usually brief exchanges about training content or specific examples. But this felt different. "Commander Cade," he wrote, "the training is being adopted Corps-wide. They're making it mandatory for all staff NCOs and officers. I wanted you to know because none of this would exist without what happened that morning, without your grace in not filing a report, without your willingness to speak to my class, without your example of turning failure into something productive. I've thought a lot about what you said, that apologies are easy but work is hard. I understand that now. I understand that changing minds requires more than words, requires showing up repeatedly, staying patient when people resist, and trusting that the truth will eventually break through defensive reactions. You asked if I was apologizing for you or for myself. At the time, I didn't know the difference. Now I do. Apologizing for myself would mean seeking forgiveness to alleviate my own guilt. Apologizing for you would mean acknowledging harm and working to prevent it from happening to others. The second one matters. The first one is just self-indulgence. I'll never be able to fully repair what I did. You'll always be the person I grabbed in that mess hall, and I'll always be the Marine who grabbed you. But maybe the training creates something good from something terrible. Maybe other Marines will learn without having to hurt someone first. Maybe that's worth something. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your example. And thank you for showing me that strength looks nothing like what I thought it looked like. Respectfully, Derek Vance. He sent it before he could reconsider, then sat staring at his email client wondering if he'd said too much or not enough. Commander Cade's response came 6 hours later after midnight. She must have been working late. Staff Sergeant Vance, the email began. Corps-wide adoption is significant. Congratulations on building something that will genuinely affect culture and tactical effectiveness. That's rare. Most training is bureaucratic box checking. Yours isn't. It challenges people. That's valuable. Her email continued. You asked about repair. Here's what I believe. Some things can't be fully repaired. The scar tissue remains, literally and figuratively. But scar tissue is stronger than original tissue. It's less flexible, more rigid, but more resistant to future damage. Maybe that's what growth looks like, not returning to who you were before, but becoming something different and stronger. I don't need you to keep apologizing. I need you to keep teaching. Keep challenging assumptions. Keep using what happened as an example of how easily we fail and how much work it takes to do better. That's the repair that matters, not fixing the past, but improving the future. You mentioned that you'll always be the Marine who grabbed me. That's true. But you're also becoming the Marine who built meaningful training from that failure. Both things are true simultaneously. You get to choose which one defines you going forward. I suggest choosing the second one. The work continues. Don't stop now. Alexis Cade Vance read her email multiple times. The phrase scar tissue is stronger than original tissue stayed with him, resonating in ways he couldn't fully articulate. She was right. He couldn't erase what he'd done, but he could build something stronger from the damage. The next morning, he reported to the curriculum development team. They were based at Quantico, a mix of officers and senior NCOs tasked with standardizing training across the Corps. The lead officer, a colonel named Martinez, no relation to his gunny, Martinez greeted him with cautious respect. Staff Sergeant Vance, your training has generated significant interest at the senior leadership level, but it's also generated pushback. Some people think it's unnecessary, that it distracts from combat readiness. Yes, sir. I've heard similar complaints at nearly every session. How do you respond? Vance considered his answer carefully. I remind them that combat readiness requires using all available resources effectively. If we're dismissing capable people based on assumptions, we're tactically weaker. I frame it as mission effectiveness, not politics. Usually that works. Colonel Martinez nodded. Good approach. We'll need to maintain that framing as we roll this out. The moment it becomes political, we lose support. Over the next month, Vance worked with the curriculum team to refine the training. They standardized the presentation, created instructor guides, developed assessment tools to measure effectiveness. They also gathered data from the initial session's feedback forms, follow-up surveys, behavioral observations from command staff. The data was compelling. Units that completed the training showed measurable improvements in several areas: reduced equal opportunity complaints, improved retention of female Marines, better performance evaluations for previously underestimated personnel, and stronger unit cohesion scores. The training wasn't just feel-good diversity content. It was actually working. Colonel Martinez presented the data to the Marine Corps Training and Education Command. They approved full implementation, allocated budget for instructor training, and set a timeline for Corps-wide rollout. Within 18 months, every Marine staff NCO and officer would complete the program. Vance would spend that 18 months traveling between bases, training instructors, refining content based on feedback. It was exhausting work. It was also the most meaningful work he'd ever done. 8 months after the mess hall incident, Vance returned to Quantico for a ceremony. Several Marines from his initial training sessions were being recognized for leadership excellence, and the base commander had requested Vance's presence. He sat in the audience wearing his dress blues, watching Marines receive awards for mentorship and unit improvement. Near the end of the ceremony, the base commander called him forward. Staff Sergeant Derek Vance, front and center. Vance marched forward, confused. This wasn't on the program. The base commander's voice carried through the hall. Staff Sergeant Vance's story is unusual. 6 months ago, he made a serious mistake. He acted on unconscious bias in a way that was unprofessional and harmful. Rather than making excuses or minimizing his actions, he confronted his failure directly. He researched, reflected, and built training that has since been adopted Corps-wide. This training is affecting tens of thousands of Marines. It's improving how we evaluate talent, how we build teams, how we think about leadership. And it exists because Staff Sergeant Vance chose growth over defensiveness. The commander held up a certificate. This is a Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal. Normally, we award these for sustained performance or specific acts of valor. This one is different. This one recognizes moral courage, the courage to admit fault, to learn publicly, and to build something meaningful from failure. Vance stood rigid at attention, his mind reeling. He was receiving a medal for training that existed only because he'd assaulted someone. The base commander seemed to read his thoughts. "Staff Sergeant, I know you're thinking this is undeserved, that you shouldn't be recognized for fixing a problem you created. But leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about what you do after you fail. You did the hard thing. You faced consequences, learned from them, and created value for the entire Corps. That's worth recognizing." He pinned the medal on Vance's chest, then shook his hand. "Congratulations, Marine. Now go forth and keep doing the work." Vance saluted, executed an about-face, and marched back to his seat. The ceremony continued, but he heard none of it. He kept thinking about Commander Cade's email. You get to choose which one defines you going forward. Maybe this medal was part of that choice. Maybe accepting recognition for growth didn't erase the failure that preceded it. Maybe both things could be true simultaneously. After the ceremony, Vance found himself outside, staring at the medal in its case. It felt heavy, heavier than it should. His phone buzzed. Another email from Commander Cade sent just minutes ago. "I heard about the award. Congratulations. You've earned it, not for being perfect, but for being honest about imperfection and working to improve. That's leadership. Keep going. The work isn't finished. It never is, but you're making a difference. That matters." "Alexis." Vance closed the metal case and looked up at the sky. It was clear today, no clouds, just endless blue. He thought about Commander Cade flying through the sandstorm, unable to see anything, navigating by faith and mathematics and sheer determination. Thought about her continuing to serve after her body was destroyed, finding new ways to contribute when the old ways were closed to her. Thought about the weight she carried, the lives depending on her judgment, the missions she planned while managing chronic pain and permanent limitations. And he thought about the mess hall, about grabbing her ponytail, about treating her like she was nothing. Both truths coexisted. He'd done terrible harm. He was building something meaningful from that harm. The medal on his chest represented growth, but growth that wouldn't exist without failure. He texted back, "Thank you, I'll keep working." Her response was immediate, "I know you will." Vance stood there for a few more minutes, watching clouds drift across that clear sky, thinking about flight paths and assumptions and the strange redemption that comes from facing your own worst moments and choosing to be better. Then he headed back to his office. He had 3 training sessions to prepare for next week, and the curriculum team needed his input on the instructor guide. The work continued. It would always continue, but that was fine. He was learning to carry the weight, learning that some burdens were worth bearing, learning that strength looked nothing like what he'd once imagined. Years passed. The training became standard, integrated into professional military education at all levels. Vance eventually transferred to Training and Education Command permanently, spending his days developing curriculum and mentoring new instructors. He made Staff Sergeant, then Gunnery Sergeant. His career was defined now by that training, by his commitment to challenging assumptions and improving how Marines thought about leadership and capability. He still thought about that morning in the mess hall. Still carried the guilt, but he'd learned that guilt could be useful if channeled properly. It kept him humble, kept him questioning his own judgments, kept him working to be better. Sometimes he received emails from Marines he'd never met, people who'd gone through the training and wanted to share how it had affected them. A female captain wrote about how the training helped her confront bias in her own unit, leading to the promotion of a qualified female Marine who'd been consistently overlooked. A male lieutenant described recognizing his assumptions about an older NCO with a prosthetic leg, assumptions that had prevented him from utilizing the NCO's extensive combat experience. Each email reminded Vance that the work mattered, that changing minds, even slowly, created ripples. Commander Cade continued advising DevGru, her name occasionally appearing in secure briefings that Vance now had clearance to attend. He never asked about her specific work, but he understood that operations were succeeding, that assault teams were coming home alive, that her tactical planning continued to be exceptional. They corresponded occasionally, brief professional exchanges that gradually developed into something approaching friendship. She sent him research papers on cognitive bias. He sent her feedback on training effectiveness. They discussed leadership philosophy, debated the balance between mission focus and personnel welfare, argued respectfully about whether change happened through policy or culture. 3 years after the initial incident, Vance received orders to Camp Pendleton. A female Marine had been assaulted by a male NCO who'd assumed she was weak, who'd put his hands on her in a way that echoed Vance's own failure. The command wanted him to conduct the training personally, to show that the Corps took these incidents seriously. He flew to California carrying his training materials and his own history. The session was difficult. The assaulted Marine sat in the audience, her face carefully neutral, while Vance showed the video of himself grabbing Commander Cade's hair. He could see her recognizing the parallels, could see her processing the fact that the instructor understood her experience not academically but personally. After the session, she approached him. "Gunnery Sergeant, thank you for showing that video, for admitting what you did. It helps to know that people can change." "They can," Vance agreed. "But change requires work, requires honesty, requires being willing to sit with discomfort instead of rationalizing it away." "What happened to the NCO who assaulted you, the one in the video?" "She chose not to file charges, gave me the chance to learn instead. I've spent 3 years trying to be worthy of that grace." The Marine was quiet for a moment. "I did file charges against the NCO here. Some people are angry at me for it, say I'm ruining his career over nothing." Vance felt his chest tight. "It's not nothing. What happened to you matters. Filing charges took courage. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." She nodded, tears forming. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant, for understanding, for doing this work." She left. Vance stood in the empty classroom thinking about parallel paths, about how many versions of himself were out there right now, grabbing someone's hair or making some other assumption-driven mistake. And how many versions of Commander Cade were out there, being dismissed and underestimated despite their capabilities. The work continued. More training sessions, more conversations, more slow cultural change. The Marine Corps was improving, not perfect, not even close, but measurably better than it had been. That improvement was fragile, requiring constant reinforcement, but it was real. On the 4th anniversary of the mess hall incident, Vance received an unexpected package. No return address, but the postmark said Virginia Beach. Inside was a small box and a handwritten note. "Derek, 4 years. You've spent them doing meaningful work, affecting thousands of Marines, creating lasting change. I wanted to mark that in some way. This belonged to me during my flying years. I carried it on every combat mission. It survived Helmand. It's been sitting in a drawer since then, and I think it should go to someone who understands what it represents. Not perfection, not heroism, just showing up, doing the work, and trying to be better than you were yesterday. Keep flying, even when the weather's terrible. Alexis." Vance opened the small box. Inside was a worn leather patch, the kind aviators attached to their flight suits. It showed the silhouette of an FA-18 Super Hornet with the call sign.